media. So just recognizing that, just happy to have you here. I'm Chelsea Crochet. I'll be your host for today. And if there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. So you are now joining the Radon ReconciliACTION presentation by Keenan Williams. So this presentation is reconciliation through discussions alone or just words. So reconciliation by leading through tangible activities with real world implications or positive steps forward. This project that tested 70 homes for radon gas in Samson Cree Nation in a collaboration led by Maskwacis Health Services with Alberta Health Services and Indigenous Services Canada. So today I'd like to welcome Keenan, our presenter. Keenan is an Indigenous professional from Sandy Lake First Nation. He's passionate about health equity with Indigenous people and specializes in Indigenous health promotion. He graduated from the University of Toronto with a Bachelor of Science with honors in 2007 and finished his Master's in Public Health from the University of Arizona in 2013. Keenan uses strength-based Indigenous worldviews to address health inequities from a systems thinking approach. Keenan is passionate about advocating for improvement of access and health services to Indigenous communities. Before we get started, I just put our Together for Health website in the chat box. And also there's opportunity to win a draw if you want to complete a short survey. And those draws are done on Fridays. So if you do it, you'll be in the draw for Friday. So, and we also, just to let you know, it is being recorded. It will be put up on our Together for Health webpage as soon as it's ready and gets transferred over, and you'll be able to review it as well or send other people to look at it. So I'd just like to thank everyone for being here, and I will pass it on to Keenan.
Thank you, Chelsea. Let me just share my screen and get us started here. So today we're talking about radon. It is a very interesting topic, and more importantly, this was a collaboration that was led by our Indigenous community. So in this case, it was Maskwacis Health Services in partnership and focused on with Samson Cree Nation. So I really want to acknowledge, just starting from the onset, that I was part of the initial ask and part of the team all throughout all the activities to date. However, it really is a First Nation-led initiative that was really in partnership with Alberta Health Services. And we also had connections with the federal government through Indigenous Services Canada. So just starting out and laying a bit of a foundation here. What is radon? It is naturally occurring. There is no concern about this being a First Nation specific or Métis or Indigenous community specific issue. This is a worldwide issue where radon is naturally occurring. It comes out of the ground, and what ends up happening is that especially come winter time, when the ground's a little bit more solid, radon will rise to the ground and then pool in the lowest levels available. Quite often, those are basements of homes, of things of that nature, and there's no easy way to detect it. It's a colorless, odorless, radioactive gas that throughout the world, there are certain areas where there are hotspots or larger concentrations. According to most of the literature in Canada, which there are limitations in the literature. For example, in Alberta, we're not too sure of a comprehensive review of where are the hotspots of radon gas, but in general, the rule of thumb is that radon exists in high levels usually in about 5% of most Canadian homes. So how does radon enter the homes? It's a gas, and wherever there's a hole, a crack, a porous nature that it can slip in through the foundation and the insulation and any openings such as drains or in the walls, windows that are have some space in it. It doesn't take much and it can fill in. So what's the concern with radon? Well, as you can see on the screen here, it is a carcinogen, meaning it can cause, it can lead to lung cancer in particular. And according to most estimates, radon is the second most common cause of lung cancer. So we expect that there's about 16% of lung cancers are naturally occurring because of radon. So what the original impetus for this whole work really came to be was the environmental health officer from Maskwacis Health Services came forward and said, I know radon exists. When people look at housing as a social determinant of health, it's often looked at in terms of availability and safety from what the house itself is. However, there are other sources of concern that impact housing, and that's why they said, we took a look around. We don't know how much radon is in central Alberta. We don't know if we're at risk or not. This could be an entirely preventable approach. One of the key principles that was set from the very beginning of this Indigenous-led piece of work was the community saying, we don't want to just identify issues. We want to be able to fix them as they occur. So those were the conversations that started this work. And it was a fascinating process and collaboration opportunity because the environmental health officer at MHS came forward and contacted a member and a colleague over in Central Zone and Alberta Health Services and said, can we do some radon work? And here's the need, here's what we're hoping, and here is the issue. We want to be able to fix as well as identify problems. And then that came forward, and that I got connected to say, how can we support? A grant was written and submitted to CERC as part of the Tri-Council funding out of Ottawa. And that came forward under the broader umbrella of social determinants of health and how to do community level work. So Chelsea mentioned in the beginning, but I think it's important enough that I'd like to this is one of the few areas where I'd actually want to read this again. And this opened all of our reports saying reconciliation through discussions alone are just words. However, reconciliation by leading through tangible activities with real world implications are positive step forward. So as I discussed, what we're really trying to do through the course of this work is do long-term home-based radon testing and be able to mitigate or be able to fix every home that had elevated levels of radon gas. So what did we do? We broke this out into 3 different phases. The first phase was purely assessment. We came forward and we were able to test 70 homes in Samson Cree Nation in order with long-term radon detectors. These radon detectors you can get at at a Home Depot or any home service place. Usually they're between $20 to $30. It's not an elaborate contraption where you find these items, you bring them forward, you place it in a basement, usually with a little bit of an area, and you kind of just leave it there for 3 months. And after that point in time, we picked up the radon detectors, went door to door, picked up all 70 of them, boxed them up and shipped them off to the manufacturer, who also did the testing and analysis, and then they were able to provide us the results. As part of this assessment, and this is the value of the collaborative nature of this work, we also gathered information about the housing characteristics in the area. So the First Nation already had fairly comprehensive housing surveys completed out of all of their homes. So we sat down as a small team of 5 individuals and said, looking at these various characteristics, what do we want to test for? How can we make sure we have a broad range of tests that are occurring across the community, both geographically and across the characteristics, to be able to say, are we only testing homes that were built in the 80s, or let's make sure that we're testing homes that were built earlier and later as well? Are we testing homes that have a sub pump? Let's make sure we have ones that have a sub pump and those that lack. So we went through all of these detailed characteristics and said, here's some big buckets that we want to test for. And that information helped select, helped identify which of the 70 homes we were hoping to test. After we did the test, after we received the results, that's when we entered into phase 2, which is the mitigation phase. So Health Canada has very clear guidelines about dangerous levels of radon. So anything over 200 becquerels per meter cubed, but on the report, anything over 200, those are dangerous levels of radon, and that's what our target was to be able to fix. I do want to highlight how much planning and a little bit of nervousness on our part existed, because in the event that we had that all homes came back saying there was an issue, we had committed to fixing all 70. So do we have the budget for that? Are we okay with that? What else needs to be done? We were prepared for a worst case scenario. However, after phase 2, and we'll get to the results, so I'll be a little bit teaser there. After phase 2, we identified the homes that needed to be fixed. We mitigated them appropriately, and we brought in a radon mitigation certified specialist. And after the fix occurred, then we went back and entered into phase 3, which was the verification. So we had to wait until the wintry months, October again, to be able to deploy the long-term testing to be able to confirm, did our mitigation actually work, and have we reduced the levels of radon gas in here? One key consideration, and I want to highlight it on this timeline field right now, is that you can only, or the recommended deployment of a long-term radon tester, which has a high degree of accuracy, is over the winter months. So we could not mitigate during the summertime, say September there. We had to wait a little bit and say, let's make sure we're waiting till the winter, we're waiting till the ground freezes up a little bit and things of that nature, so that we're truly testing during the time of the year when radon levels are the highest. So all of these considerations were happening and in the planning of our Radon ReconciliACTION work, but in a high level, these are the steps that we took. This was fascinating work, and I wanted to start with the community knowledge exchange that we had. There was concern at the beginning that if we went out to the community and just started knocking on doors and saying we're going to test for radon, the people will come back and say, well, what is radon? How is that impacting me? Am I a danger? Is it a danger here just in my house, or why am I being selected? So we started by doing a lot of health promotion and awareness at various places. There was a health fair that was just before the pandemic, as well as powwow, but we also got, and at those settings, we set up a table, we had some printed out materials from Health Canada, from other sources, to be able to say, here's some background on what radon is. And then we also developed some further handouts that were targeted to the community of Samson Cree Nation, just be able to say, here's some specific concerns, here's some practical awareness just for you to be aware of. Know that it's naturally occurring. It's not an on reserve type thing. It's not targeting your home. We're just testing and seeing what's out there, because we don't know, and it is a risk, it is a concern, but we can also fix it. And from the feedback that I have heard from those conversations, that reassurance of being able to say, we will fix it, is the key message that turned this into a positive experience and a happy conversation with community members, as opposed to raising the flag of a concern and then leaving it there, or in a worst case scenario saying this is the responsibility of someone else to address. And we didn't want to be in a situation where we would be going to chief and council or MHS health leadership and saying, thank you for our time. We did our work. Here's the issue. Now you're going to have to find a budget to fix. And by the way, we've just caused a community-wide panic. Some of those other activities of just getting the word out. Their Hawk Radio is a great way to reach out to the community members in that area. So there's a number of interviews that happened. And I really want to applaud Mike, our the lead on this, the environmental health officer at Maskwacis Health Services, for really leading all of these discussions and being someone from the community that you can trust and build support. And he can also say, this is very appropriately part of his job. We're here, we're all here to help, but let's move forward with that. This one last piece on this slide that I do want to highlight is that when we first put in our grant, and it was a very small grant, it was less than $70,000. That's important because the testing is about, say, $25 each. So when we originally did the proposal, we said testing is cheap, it's the mitigation that's expensive. When you go outside and bring in other companies and supplies and contractors and things of that nature, radon mitigation can cost upwards of $2,500 or more for each home. So within the budget and the other activities that we're trying to accomplish, we said, if every home has the issue, and that was our underlying assumption from a planning and risk mitigation perspective, we have the budget to fix 20 homes. We can test 20 homes. If they all come back as being a major concern, which we simply do not know, then we can commit the budget to fixing 20 homes. The reason why we were able to more than triple the homes and the reach and the impact that we had through this Radon ReconciliACTION work is that the nation and Maskwacis Health Service itself, or actually, sorry, Samson Cree Nation Housing Department was brought in as part of a collaboration, as part of this work, community-based approaches, and they committed to providing some training dollars to be able to say, why are we bringing outside people in to do this work? If we train ourselves up, this becomes a sustainability approach where we become certified in radon mitigation, and that decreases the cost of fixing every home from $2,500 down to about $400, which is the cost of the cost of raw materials. And so those were brought forward. The First Nation put skin in the game, and that is the single reason why we're able to go from guaranteeing fixing 20 homes to being able to have a broader reach across the community and fixing all 70. So this became a very collaborative and impact, and I really want to acknowledge the fact that people put skin in the game. When they heard about this work, they heard about the need. It's pretty straightforward, and it's a pretty straightforward fix, which brought more people to the table. So here's our results. All told, we put out 70 detectors. We got back 67, 3 of them, and we knew that there was going to be attrition at some point in time. I think in one home, there was a bit of construction going on, and they had to move. They had to move the one radon detector, so we had to say, hey, we can't submit this because they have to stay stationary. in another home, there was a bit of movement and someone knocked it over, and it kind of got smashed up a little bit. Those are totally expected. We weren't worried about getting all 70 homes in. These are totally realistic things, because leaving a small little contraption that's very delicate in a basement hanging from a string, typically from in an area that's an open common space, we were able to highlight and say, yeah, we're going to lose some. That said, I'm really excited and really appreciate all the people living in the homes, and Mike and Twain, who was supporting the actual deployment. They went forward, and we as a project team had prepared an information package about not only radon, but specifically about this radon reconciliation work, what to expect, identifying the need to please, please, please leave these detectors alone. We're going to come one of these days, install them, and then pick them up. Please leave them alone. And then also be very clear of next steps. So what is involved? What is mitigation? What's involved? If there is an issue, who gets priority? When does mitigation occur? Things of that nature. So there was a door-to-door installation aspect, as well as a health promotion activities that were occurring simultaneously. Out of the 67 detectors that were brought back and sent off to the lab for testing, 4 of those were identified as being having dangerous levels of radon. And that on the screen, you can see that's about 6%, which very surprisingly, pleasantly surprisingly to us, we were able to say, hey, that's close to in the literature, the national average of about 5% of homes could have a radon issue. Interestingly, we had no idea what the protective factors would be. So in terms of the housing characteristics, what I mean specifically is that houses on reserve, they're not always known for being of the highest level of construction. So we kind of assumed there would be various places that would have a bunch of holes in it, or ways for a naturally occurring gas to be able to get in. And our big question at the very beginning was, will those be able to let more gas come in and pool in the basement? Or will that be a protective factor that allows more gas to get out once it comes in? We weren't really sure. There was a couple of intuitive leaps that we were making there. But ultimately, the day the results came in, and out of a list of 70, only 4 needed to be fixed, we collectively had a huge sigh of relief and saying, okay, this is doable, this is somewhat expected, and this is not a significant emergency per se. It's still important, but if we only tested 70 homes and there's a higher rate, then that would be indicative that all homes in the community could be fixed. And that was really our worst case scenario. That said, if it is an issue, we would much rather be able to identify and address it as opposed to just ignoring it and leaving it be. So we produced a number of reports and outputs as part of this work. We're really just highlighting in this area and on this slide, these were the 4 homes that exceeded the limitations. We've highlighted them in the box up on top. Some of them just barely exceeded. In many regards, that's a good way. That's a good thinking. Whereas a few others had significantly higher levels. And we were very surprised as a project team what the disbursement was. So looking at it scientifically, we could say, with one exception, talking about the undercoating and the thickness of the plastic related to the housing, there was no statistical significance with the homes that had radon. relative to other things. And that's related to the housing survey that I mentioned earlier. So what year was the house constructed? It doesn't really matter. What's the subfloor, or what's the foundation of the home, or does it have a crawl space? We had a list a mile long of all these different qualities and characteristics. And in plain language, there's kind of no rhyme or reason as to why these homes in particular came forward, which as a project team, we mostly just found interesting. I don't know how else to say it other than that, but um, that's certainly a starting point, and it's nice to be aware of. I want to pause just on this screen a little bit here. This is a map of Samson Cree Nation. There's two call out areas. One's on the left-hand side, and then one's on that right. A lot of development, a lot of work went into this visual. I want to start by acknowledging this was a key contribution from Indigenous Services Canada. We really appreciate their contributions and support of this work. They provided this map because they already had the community mapped, especially in terms of the homes, and they used, to my understanding, the water testing that they use when they regularly go around and make sure that there's no E. coli or other dangerous substances in the water. They have a bunch of these houses already mapped, and these are very specifically identified to the appropriate longitude and latitude coordinates provided. So we very much appreciate that they were able to develop this map with the results that we provided in a real hurry. A second principle was to be able to say, hey, we're probably going to have to print this out in black and white, or we're probably going to have individuals reading this who, in various materials, this picture is a lot smaller or different shapes or who knows what. So originally we first started with everything being a dot, and then we said, no, let's make sure it's a dot, a triangle, a star, a something to break it up. And you will see that there are 4 houses. So one in the top left here, 2 in the center, and this is the same one that's just in the call out box, and then 1 on the eastern quadrant of the community. So for lack of a better word, we kind of said, it's interesting and it's important that we plotted this on a map and showed the geographic impacts and spread. There's nothing statistically significant about the findings, but just looking at this output, we're able to say, it's interesting that there's one kind of line across the middle of our community where we had the dangerous levels. Above that line, we actually have very low levels of radon, so that less than 100 becquerel per meter cubed. However, just south of that line, there seems to be a huge increase in these middle range, that 100 to 199 becquerel per meter cubed. The reason why, and this was the reason why our team selected 3 different categories. We said, it's nice to know what the dangerous levels of radon is, because we need to address that. We also want to be able to say, these are the homes that when we test, we probably don't need to test again because they're so incredibly low. It's nothing of concern. However, then we added this third piece of saying, between 100 to almost the 200, what are the ones that we want to keep an eye on? Are there any activities, or is there anything that all of a sudden there might just be a rush of radon in a certain area that we might want to keep an eye on or check back later? And so plotting the results on this map started to give us some idea of being able to say, oh, hey, we don't need to focus our attention and future work in this area, such as in the northern central type quadrant on the map. If we want to focus somewhere else, let's make sure we check on the southern part. And we were able to share some of these results, and we've shared all of these results to Chief and Council first for approval, and then started sharing the People's Report and other information to the community. An interesting observation is that one of the old timers took a look at this map and said, "Oh, well, I've been working in this community and digging and working this land for my whole life, and this kind of makes sense because the ground and the work that he's done in those blue quadrants is one type of land, whereas the ground south of that is a little bit more, for lack of a better word, porous, different materials. But from an anecdotal perspective, it was nice to be able to say, someone who knows the area, these results kind of are validating, but also further informs the next time or future work related to radon in this area that we will do, will include a stronger focus on those geologic factors. So we'll try to find whatever we can, if there's maps or ground flows or what's the drilling in this area, what to expect. That can potentially be another way to reduce confounding factors moving forward, and then be able to increase the accuracy of identifying where should we look for problems with radon based on these factors. So this was very practical in terms of the work, but I do want to highlight how important this was to use OCAP. OCAP is a First Nation focused research methodology focused on ownership, control, access, and possession. Really, why we were so strong in this area was because we had that Indigenous leadership. We had the First Nation community itself saying, this is the need, what can we do to fix it? When we had every step along the way, from proposal writing to meeting, from the first gathering of meetings to identifying the methodology, collecting the results, analyzing the results. It was never an AHS-led initiative. This was always a community-led initiative. And with every stage of the approval process, we said to our community leaders, in this case, it was the environmental health officer at Maskwacis Health Services, here's the information, here's where we need to go to next. What do you think needs to happen? How do we need to get this approved? They went and did all the data collection. They moved forward and received the collection of the results from the radon company when we first set off those long-time pieces, and then invited us to support with some pieces of the analysis moving forward. And all of that analysis was drafted, and we did all the best of statistical significance and the proper scientific analysis that we'd do anywhere. However, all of those results were then presented back, not to our leadership, but to the community and the project leadership, and saying, this is what we see. Do these results resonate? There are ways of interpreting this information. So how is it appropriate to interpret the information for your community and in this area? And really leading the voice and the framing of all of the work from there. So I really want to say, from that perspective, it was a huge success. There were some organizational learning points. There were some friction points of, we had the results for a while. However, it required chief and council approval before disseminating. So as an employee of AHS, for example, I was grateful to be able to contribute to the whole piece and body of work. However, I wasn't able to share that with my team or my leadership until we went through the community first. And that was so critical. It's a little bit of a different way of doing things. And to be fair, part of the delay was not because the community certainly saw it as a need. However, getting time on Chief and Council's agenda during a pandemic was certainly a limitation, certainly challenging, but also very appropriate because other priorities were elsewhere. I've heard this in another presentation, so I want to highlight the last component of the OCAP in action was that originally the proposal, just based on logistics, I submitted the proposal to the Tri-Council, to CERC, and they thought because I submitted that I would also be the account holder, when in reality, we wanted to ensure, and it was a critical principle and action, that if this is a community-led thing, why is the money going to the health system rather when it should be going to the community directly itself? So I also want to acknowledge the contracts and the administrative supports we receive from CERC to be able to make sure and transfer all the funding and the reporting requirements and the ownership of the actual grant itself, so that Maskwacis Health Services from start to finish was in full control of this work. I started talking about some of the COVID-19 impacts, specifically about Chief and Council. Totally recognize that. That said, when we were able to present, they received the People's Report and went through those in details and really appreciated and supported the work that had occurred. We started with one Chief and Council. There was an election during the life cycle of our project. And so we had about half the Chief and Council that was aware of the Radon ReconciliACTION work, and the other half was receiving regular updates, but also really curious to see what the final report would be. So then coming back to my original points here, we were able to go into the homes and be able to start doing some of the deploying the testing. So being able to say, hey, we're going to install this radon detector in your home. That was okay, but when it came to notifying individuals of what the results were, there was a delay because we wanted to provide that notification in person, especially for those homes that had dangerous levels that we wanted to really address. We didn't want it to be a phone call or an email or an announcement on Hawk Radio saying, hey, everybody, here's our results. Oh, by the way, there's 4 homes that there's an issue and your home is one of the issues. We didn't want to cause undue concern or worry, and that's why we had a little bit of delay of notifying the people living in the homes and being able to say, hey, here's what your results are, either not to be worried or not to be worried, but we still want to keep an eye on it, or we're going to be back soon to be able to fix. So we were able to provide a little bit of a verbal disclosure, especially of those blue or those lower level results, and be able to say, pick up the phone, call them up and say, hey, just let you know, you're okay, not to worry in your home, but then knocking on the door of the others. Lastly, in the middle of a pandemic, it's awfully hard to bring out contractors from some distance away. Actually, there wasn't a nearby community. I believe the radon mitigation specialists that came in this first time, they were based out of Calgary, so they had to drive up to Maskwacis, which is 1 hour south of Edmonton, and not only get to the community, but enter the 4 homes and have all of the physical distancing, the safety precautions in place so that we're not placing an undue risk or exposure in a pandemic environment to those individuals where we want to fix their homes. Thankfully, we were able to do that relatively quickly, which was a wonderful expectation. We were fully prepared for that to be delayed. But with a little bit of planning, folks were mostly able to get out of their homes, and We worked with the contractors this first time to be able to say, here's how you come in. And I want to acknowledge, just to be clear, because I might be confusing the audience a little bit. Trainings being provided to the staff, to Maskwacis Health Services and Samson Cree Nation housing on the radon mitigation. For this first part, we said we have some money in the budget. It's only 4 homes. Let's bring in a proper company so that we can see how it's done and make sure that the learnings we have and the training we've occurred, is there any other practical on the ground pieces when you're mitigating that you need to install that they won't teach you in a textbook or through a course? So there's doing it right the first time, but also using it simultaneously as a learning opportunity, and just validating the learnings that are happening there. I want to highlight, I want to come back to that point of Samson Housing saying, yes, we'll train some of our staff to be able to do radon mitigation. There is an element required to keep that certification up. There's a certain number of hours per year that are required of testing and making sure you're actively using the knowledge that you have. And they said, yes, we can certainly use this for the rest of our homes. We can continue just on our own now that we know what the process is. Community members are prepared for the conversation about radon. We might focus a little bit more on the southern area and some of the homes here because that's where we had more yellow triangles. However, the community very astutely acknowledged and identified this is an opportunity to serve nearby communities as well. There's nothing stopping them from servicing and supporting non-Indigenous surrounding communities. Considering we had to go to Calgary in order to get that support, why can't we have it be local capacity? And why can't it, in many ways, be a sustainable business practice on the part of the nation to support Samson, to be able to support the other 3 First Nations that are part of Maskwacis Health Services, as well as the non-Indigenous communities nearby. So that was not a planned approach when we first started all of this work, but it certainly is a welcome output that goes a long way to building conversations, building capacity. And from my perspective, I'm so amazed and so proud of this community and this work for being able to say, we can be leaders in just about anything, and we can prove that we can be leaders in radon to the point where we can support all Albertans in this area. I guess I should have selected my slide to this next page because that's in many regards what ReconciliACTION can be, fostering conversations, working in partnerships, and trying to lead healthy, fulfilling lives and with all of our relations. There are many projects that we can work on, and plenty of things can be great science, and you wonder, well, so what? What's so important about this work is that the so what is there were 4 homes in Samson Cree Nation that had elevated risk of radon that could lead to lung cancer of anyone who's living in that home, but most especially in the basements. And it's not uncommon for kids, for youth in particular, to live in those basement settings. And it's completely unfair that they would be exposed to something that wouldn't potentially be diagnosed for years, if not decades, that is entirely fixable. So what about this project? We were able to fix the home. We were able to fix 4 homes so that those individuals in those homes do not have to work or are not exposed to elevated risks of lung cancer, to a carcinogen. For me, stopping right there, all of this work, this years of effort are absolutely worth it just to be able to make that statement, to be able to be proud of reducing that risk and making social determinants of health in many regards real, as opposed to some of these conversations that we have that are sometimes challenging to identify and become as practical as might be identified. So this came from our report. I really just want to say in conclusion, our ReconciliACTION build a foundational path of working together and engaging not only in the future of Alberta's Indigenous communities by working and building nurturing relationships, collaboration, co-development, and supporting Indigenous leadership, it also provided a pathway for multi-jurisdictional collaborations. A fancy way of saying a First Nation brought forward the provincial health system and also made the federal departments. We all played nice together. We all worked towards one common goal of supporting the health of community members in this one area. And that's a powerful statement. That's a wonderful success. Our outputs have resulted in things, and I apologize for not updating the slide. We prepared a detailed technical report. We prepared a people's report, and that's what was really shared and available to the community members to be able to say, not in 50 pages, but in 10 pages or less, what did we do? Why did we do it? What were the results? And how does this impact you? We prepared a scientific poster that we can now use in other venues, especially as the world's entering the redeployment phase of the pandemic. And as of last week, Mike and we've submitted an application to a conference down in Australia to be able to present this work. It's an Indigenous-led conference out of Auckland, and we look forward to hearing those results soon. But this is such a unique topic and unique approach, and we were able to wrap up the deliverables and have very clear outcomes. So it's nice to be able to say, here's what we did, and we're glad to share our approach and what we're able to accomplish to anyone else who might be interested. So that's it for presentations.
Thanks, Keenan. Yeah, are there any questions for Keenan? You can either go off mute or put them in the chat box.
I do have a question. With the drilling, did it make a difference if there was oil wells near where you were getting the higher readings, or?
This is where it starts to get a little bit anecdotal. There are a number of drilling sites located in the community. Someone observed that there were some drill sites that could be kind of in the area of the red sites. However, I'm sharing that observation with a huge asterisk and a lot of uncertainty with it, because we weren't studying specifically for drill sites or oil sites, so we don't know. There were other drill sites that were nearby other homes that were completely in the blue. So good question, area for future study.
Great. We have a question in the chat box. Great presentation and project. As you've shared your results, have you had any interest from other communities to repeat the project there? And I had the same question, actually.
Yes. So this ultimately, we have some usage and some confusion about the word phases. I highlighted and showed on the screen how there was 3 different phases of identification, mitigation, and validation. That's not to be confused with this whole work with Samson is really intended to be phase 1 of a broader stage. So there will be other work. We're replicating. The intent is to be able to replicate the same approach with the other 3 communities that Maskwacis Health Services serves. And we're using that information. So for example, down south, I believe, don't hold me to it, but I believe in Montana First Nation, One of the first things we did was asked our old timer to talk to other old timers who work down in Montana, the Montana First Nation, and be able to say, what's the land like? Is it more porous? Is it less porous? And some of the feedback we received to date was that in some of those, on the two communities that are a little bit southern, people believe the land's a bit more porous. So we're kind of preparing ourselves for more results that are in that yellow, that 100 to 199 becquerel per meter cubed. We don't know, but that's informing, that's some of the lessons learned that we're using. And for the northern community in the area that they serve, it's a little bit more denser, harder packed land. So we're hoping that might be more in the blue. However, at this stage, it's just a little bit of a guess. We've used up all our money and we didn't get much money in the first place. We did identify a little bit of a surplus because we didn't have to fix 70 homes. That's fantastic. So we immediately reinvested those dollars, some into the radon, the long-term testing kits, but most of it into the more expensive raw materials, because we do know there will be more work required. There will be more homes that need to be mitigated. So it's better to have the supplies prepared while we have the funding, to have the staff and the workforce ready to do it. And now we have an approach that's very effective that we can adapt and move forward. Truth be told, this is a very self-sustaining project from this stage moving forward. It's a community-led initiative and it will continue to be that way. The largest rate determining step, or the largest limitation in the whole process, is the fact that we can only really test for 3 months starting in October, November. So realistically, we can test at one point in time, get the results sometime early in the new year, be able to send that off. And this lab that we were working with, the results were sent off to a Vancouver area company, if memory serves me correct, for them to do their testing, send us the results back, identify what homes need to be fixed, actually fix the homes. It's a whole year-long process from start to finish if we're effective throughout. But it's not like we can say, oh, hey, here's a home, we fixed it, we want to test it right away. We're constantly waiting for those summer months. So I guess I'm excited for those summer months when we can move this progress forward, but the intention is to be able to replicate the same approach to the other First Nations in the area. And one of the immediate benefits of that is that it maintains the minimum required of radon hours required to keep that certification. So for the next, 3-4 years, there's a clear plan laid out and it just moves community by community.
Any other questions?
I see that question was from Nicole as well, so hopefully we answered that.
Good question. Quick question, in the future, oh, sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it did answer my question. Thanks very much, Keenan, and great work.
And I'm wondering, in the future with this project and the partners that were involved, is there a chance for it to lead into sort of, working together as a regulatory action, working with the communities first, their housing departments, and kind of working together just because of the it's safety, because of, the older housing builds weren't to par. Is there potential for that, and it's being put in as a regulatory measure to support communities and health of the communities? This
is again where I want to applaud the leadership, all the leadership of Samson Cree Nation. Beyond the regulatory or the required aspects or the Health Canada best practices when responding and dealing to radon, Samson has moved forward with an initiative or a statement saying, moving forward, we're building our homes. If it costs a little bit extra to add a potential vent or a placeholder vent knowing that we can toss in a radon mitigation. It's a unit. It's basically a fancy fan that's installed in the basement and a hole is punched through the foundation. They're already changing their housing practices or any upgrades to the homes that are required if there's any impacts on the foundations. As a direct result of this work, they're saying, let's just kill two birds with one stone and make sure that we're ready in the event that this home will need to be included in a mitigation at a later point in time. Let's start making those changes now. The one other piece from a housing perspective that was interesting, and we have no explanation why, there's nothing in the literature. If there was a thicker piece of plastic used in the insulation and in the lower sections of the home, that was the one finding that was statistically significant. And we were completely confused as to why would thicker plastic lead to more gas being in the basement. And near as we can tell, our best guess is that once it gets in from wherever it stays, the plastic actually traps the gas in the basement. However, you can have a home literally just next door, which we demonstrated, that has plastic that is literally 2 millimeters thinner, and that house does not have any radon concerns. So moving forward, Samson's just, before they wouldn't necessarily ask what's the level of plastic beyond what are the cost implications. Whereas right now they're saying, for some reason, the 7 millimeter wasn't working. So let's make sure, or there was a higher risk associated with that. It costs us really nothing. So let's make sure we're using the other material just to be safe.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have enough time for one more.
I have one more question. Do you feel like there was, or what's your perspective on sort of the public education aspect of the project? Do you feel like people like learned something valuable out of the process? And did you get any of that kind of feedback from the community?
Yes, that was one of the questions that we asked. Specifically from the 70 homes, I will say that this was a unique approach because the housing department has full authority to just go into the homes and do whatever fixes they feel required. So we were worried from the project side of saying, what panic might we cause? Cancer gas everywhere, it's going to kill you all. We didn't want that as an experience. When we were knocking on the doors, Mike and Twain were able to have those one-to-one conversations and address everything. And it was critical because those guys are known in the community. They're respected and trusted in the community. And so when they said not to worry and here's more information, that was truly trusted and accepted. From the broader community engagement perspectives, the general sense, the general feedback that was received was, this is another table, there's more information happening here. Oh, we're going to be doing something in this community about radon. Oh, that's great, we're doing something about it. Oh, by the way, what's radon? And that health promotion conversation really perpetuated from one person going back and being able to have that conversation with their family or over the dinner table or however people communicated, and being able to say, oh yeah, you heard about radon? Yeah, it could be a thing. We're going to find out if it's a thing. And now we're at the current stage where people are saying, we are exactly on the national average. We're keeping an eye on what radon is. We, as a community members, most people, I'm pleasantly surprised, are at least familiar that it's a naturally occurring odorless gas that can lead to lung cancer. Those are the key messages. But more importantly, the sense that I have is how empowering that conversation is. Not only the fact that it can be fixed, but a little bit of a sense of pride that our community members and our housing department and our leadership are the ones initiating and having the capacity to fix it. So I was a little bit worried at the beginning, but people are very comfortable with this conversation now.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Great information. Thanks, Keenan. I never saw this presentation yet, so great work. I just want to let you know that we have a lot of more presentations coming up, and other ones that you might have missed are on the Together for Health website. And also we have a short survey, like I mentioned. The link is up in the chat box. Beaded items and promo items, so you could be the lucky winner. And I like to post this. If you are a lucky winner, it'd be great if you took a picture with your item and maybe put it on our Together for Health page. Would love to hear your feedback that way too, or just to let others know. So I'd like to thank everyone, and have a great afternoon.